Hi, I'm your host, Rob Deutschman, and I'm pleased to welcome back to the podcast my guest. Now, I looked him up in Wikipedia, and I thought I would just repeat what I saw there. It describes him as a retired Canadian politician, most notable for serving as regional chair of the regional municipality of Waterloo from 1985 to 2018. He served as mayor of the lower tier municipality of Woolwich in the 1970s. Notable policy legacies include the controversial, quote, countryside line, a municipally managed greenbelt, and the development of Waterloo's light rail transit system, which was a defining topic in the 2014 election. He also helped spearhead action in the late 1990s and early 2000s to ban smoking indoors in Waterloo businesses. After 2014, he was selected to co-lead a provincial report into efficiency and reform in municipal regional government. I'm pleased to welcome back the former regional chair, Ken Seiling. Ken, what do you think? Wikipedia got you down cold?
Yes, they did. I thought it was pretty well done. It'd be interesting to know who wrote it. There are lots of other things that happened during that time that I think is important.
I just thought it was interesting because it talked about the smoking bylaw, which is one of the things that we're going to be touching on today. So I found that quite interesting. I'm still trying to get someone to give me a Wikipedia entry. Just kidding.
I didn't even know I had one.
I thought I'm going to double check and see, and there he was. So, Ken, how are things going these days? What are you busy with?
Well, I'm serving on a number of boards, one of which is the MPAC, the Municipal Assessment Corporation Board. The province appointed me to that.
Oh.
I'm the chair of the Granville Choir. I'm the Laura Festival Board, United Way Board, I'm the Wilfrid Laurier University Board, and the Martin Luther University College Board. So I've got a few things to keep me going.
So does Zoom make it easier to be part of all these boards?
Even though I don't particularly like Zoom, it does, yes, because particularly during this period of time, you can have meetings that much easier and on short notice, and don't have to do quite so much traveling. But with our MPAC, we're actually going back to in-person meetings, and I have to say that if I have a choice, I like the in-person meetings better because your body language, you know how people are reacting, you know when you can speak and can't speak. It's a much better format, and I think Zoom, when I take a look at the political system and some of the municipal councils, I see some of the things that are going on, and I see a style that's not very, I don't think it's conducive to good governance because people say and do things that they probably wouldn't do if they were in person. They're less measured sometimes when they speak, and there's no body language to read it in those meetings. So I think getting back in person will be a good thing.
Yeah, I understand. It's just you get to spend a little more time at the cottage, though.
That's right.
Which is a good thing. So, Ken, just on MPAC, is Dan Matheson still involved with that, or?
He's been gone for about 2 or 3 years now, I believe.
Oh, okay, I remember he chaired that for a long time as well.
Yes.
Well, congratulations on that appointment. So, if I'm not happy with property tax assessments, I'll come and talk to you.
It's all very scientific.
Yeah, of course. All right, the magic. Yes, the black magic. But anyway. So, Ken, we're going to talk about we're going to talk about hospitals, the amalgamation, and we're not talking about the current situation, but the past. And we're going to touch on smoking policy, which was referenced in the Wikipedia intro. But we kind of had a discussion on the public health board, or that the regional municipality of Waterloo is the public health board. And how does that operate, function in relation to the hospitals? I was just curious about that.
There actually is no relationship between the Board of Health and the hospital system. They're completely independent. The hospitals are independent. They're corporations of one form or another, and they operate, I guess, under the guidance of the province of Ontario. But regional council has no say or involvement in the hospitals, other than appointing other than appointing members of some of the boards.
Right. So the health board would be like responsible for restaurant inspections, that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Right, public health, that's all the public health measures, restaurant food inspections, disease control, babies, general health issues, those kinds of things.
Right. Okay, and we'll delve into that in a moment. I just wanted to touch on the because we have a bit of a history on a discussion about or debate in the community about hospital amalgamations in the past, right?
Well, certainly it was a topic of discussion back in the 90s when the province decided to examine healthcare across the province, particularly at hospitals.
And was this under Harris or Ray? Which government are we talking
It was the
about?
Harris government, and they set up the Health Services Restructuring Commission to examine hospitals across the province of Ontario.
Do you recall what the concern was at the time that brought about that? The HSRC is the acronym for that committee?
Right. Well, hospital costs were escalating quickly as they continue to do so. They were consuming a bigger and bigger chunk of the provincial revenues. And the government was trying to see, is there a more efficient way to operate the healthcare system, particularly hospitals? Duplications, too much of something, too little of something, more cooperation, different ways of providing care. All those things were looked at by the commission.
Yeah, and I guess if you're a community with 2 or 3 hospitals, there must be a number of areas of duplication that would be ripe for some more efficiencies. Is that not the case?
I think that's true at any time. It's and maybe it isn't a cost-saving measure. Maybe it's just a more efficient use of the funding in a way, spreading the money around or sharing the services.
Was the region involved in that assessment or review at all, or was that just strictly left with the hospitals?
It was an independent work by the province of Ontario, and I can't even recall whether we made submissions at that particular time. I don't think we did. We stood back and watched largely what was going on, and the commission did its work.
Okay, so the region didn't really take any position on the issue?
No, not that I recall.
Well, you would know, right? You're at the head of it. But I mean, an efficient operating hospital, a larger hospital, is certainly a draw for any community, right? I mean, in terms of growth and population attraction.
Well, certainly we had 3 hospitals for our community, which at that time was approaching 500,000 people, of varying sizes and varying conditions. A lot of work needed to be done in the hospitals. We were having, I think, some difficulty attracting specialists in some areas. Facilities needed upgrading, and so there was a need. I think we felt we were sort of sitting back behind some of the other communities in terms of healthcare and investment in healthcare in our region. And certainly, we felt we could benefit by the commission appearing in our community.
So, when you say 3 hospitals, are we talking about St. Mary's, Grand River, and Freeport, or Cambridge, or what? Which hospitals?
Well, by that time, there originally were 4 hospitals: Freeport, Cambridge, St. Mary's, and Grand River, or KW hospitals called back then.
Yeah.
Prior to that, the Grand River and Freeport had merged into one hospital.
Oh, okay.
So it became one hospital structure, and then the other, Cambridge and St. Mary's, stood there as well.
It's interesting. I mean, Grand River changed its name from KW to Grand River, but Freeport's always stayed as Freeport.
It's called the Freeport campus, I think, of Grand River Hospital. If you look
Oh,
at the
okay.
Say Grand River Hospital.
Yeah, I know. We always say Freeport, or you're going to get transferred to Freeport, or what have you. So back then, what happened with respect to the review?
Well, what happened officially, or what happened behind the scenes?
Well, let's talk officially, and we'll talk about expectations, and then we can speculate on what happened.
Well, at that time, there was a great deal of work in the community and public comment and public activity. Initially, the chatter was that we should have one acute care hospital in the North End, which would be a merger of Grand River and St. Mary's. And that was supported by a number of people in the community. In fact, even some of the people from St. Mary's actually supported that. But then there grew up a great deal of opposition from supporters of St. Mary's Hospital, any form of amalgamation of the hospitals. And they were very well organized. There was also a group of people who we came to be known as the Three Musketeers: Bill
Yes.
Riddle, Bill Weiler, and Marilyn Wilkinson, who spearheaded a move to get the hospitals amalgamated to create one acute care hospital. So the commission did its work.
Oh, hold on a sec. I just want to clarify. So that group, which was known as the Three Musketeers, were they promoting amalgamation?
They were promoting the acute care hospitals in the North End, yes.
Okay, and when you say acute care,
well, they were promoting a new hospital, which in essence was an amalgamated hospital.
Yeah. Okay. And acute care is like primary care. Is that?
Yes, primary care, as opposed to tertiary care or palliative care.
So they were saying we need one large hospital. We don't need two separate hospitals.
And they said it just didn't make any money to spend money to renovate two old hospital buildings. It was better off to have a brand new hospital, was the position they took.
Well, I'm glad to hear Bill Renault was part of that, because I don't know if I ever told you this story. Maybe I did. When my mom was pregnant and working for him, he brought her to the hospital the day I was born. So from that new Tex on Ottawa Street.
Right.
So, okay. So they're lobbying, but then, so there must have been a group lobbying on behalf of St. Mary's to keep it independent.
But there was a very vocal group whose names I can see the people, but names I can't remember at the moment.
Right.
They were very, very, I think Anne Wine was one person, and there were some other people.
Right.
Very, very, very vocal, and lobbied very hard against that idea that St. Mary should stay on its own. So the day came that the commission was to announce its findings, and everybody had an expectation, certainly privately and otherwise, that they would. The deal is, and I'm always speaking from what I think, what I know, and what I heard.
Right.
I can't document all of this. I can document some of it. I could, but the thought was that very much the model that had been used in Guelph might be applied to Waterloo. So in Guelph, there had been two acute care hospitals, St. Joe's and St. Mary's. St. Joe's and Guelph General.
Right.
And there was an agreement made with the Sisters of St. Joseph that St. Joe's would become the chronic care and long-term care hospital, and all acute care would move to Guelph General Hospital. And that was the model that they had over there, which had some applicability in the region of Waterloo. So the thought was that the two acute care hospitals, St. Mary's and Grand River, would be merged into the acute care hospital. The Sisters of St. Joseph would take over Freeport, and much as in Guelph, to do chronic and long-term care over there, and some palliative care.
Right.
And then Cambridge was left freestanding, not amalgamated with northern hospitals. So that was the expectation going into the meeting. But when the report was handed out, suddenly there had been a change from whatever was expected. And suddenly, both acute care hospitals were left standing independent with a direction to start cooperating more. And Cambridge was given some money for renovations and also an expansion of mental health beds in Cambridge at that time. Not a new hospital, but a renovated hospital. That all came as quite a bit of a shock to many people in the community, particularly those of us who actually, by mistake, had been given a copy of the original report, which had
let's hold off on this for a second. So you show up. Where's this meeting? Is at Queen's Park?
No, I think it was at the Waterloo Motor Inn, if I remember.
Okay,
correctly.
so it's local, and local. You're in a room, and it's the minister is making the announcement.
Not the minister. I'm trying to think who the commissioner was. I think it was Mark Rochon.
Okay, so it's the commissioner of the HSRC,
right.
the committee.
Yeah.
Was the minister in attendance?
I believe she was, yes.
All right, so you're in this room, and you're provided with a copy of a report. And in your copy of the report, what does it say?
Merge the two acute care hospitals. The Sisters of St. Joseph take over Freeport.
Now, did you know that wasn't going to be the recommendation from the podium?
No, we didn't. I didn't know what the recommendation would be until they read it, and it was. So what we were told had happened was that there had been a change of heart in the commission just prior to the release of the report for whatever reason. I won't speculate with that reason, but there had been a change of heart, and the recommendation was now changed to say that they should both be freestanding, that a cancer unit would be built at Grand River, and the Cambridge recommendation remained the same.
Right.
So,
and was cardiac care part of that at that time?
Cardiac care came along later. It wasn't part of the original recommendation. It was something that Elizabeth Whitmer did during. She was Minister of Health at the time of the recommendations, the report, and she announced that sometime after the commission report. So
just so we have this clear about the people in the front row at this presentation got a report that talked about a merger of the hospitals. And everybody from the second row onward got the report, which was the actual announcement of keeping the two hospitals independent. That's my recollection. Somewhere in my box, 120 boxes of archival material, there should be a copy of that report. Holy Lordy. Well, this is sort of deja vu all over again, as the great Casey Stengel used to say. because this harkens back to the amalgamation.
Right. Well, I have to say, and this is my own personal opinion, that was actually, although we got a regional cancer center, which was a good move, and money to fix up the hospitals. When we take a look at what happened elsewhere, where their hospitals were merged, either from a governance point of view or actual mergers. So Thunder Bay would be a good example, where we had two separate hospitals. And what they did was they merged the hospitals, and instead of spending money to renovate two old buildings, they built a new central hospital, brand new, state-of-the-art hospital.
Yeah.
And I think that from my point of view, and what the medical community who spoke to me about it afterwards felt that we had sort of lost out to some degree, because although we got a cancer center and money to renovate these two old buildings, we really didn't have an acute care hospital that had the critical mass and size to attract specialists to the community, to bring trauma care into our region,
Right.
because trauma requires specialists, and so two operating entities separate were just didn't have the critical mass to do that. That's what I heard from the medical community.
And so you can see that, the two areas closest to us, Hamilton and London.
Yep.
They are merged, aren't they? Like
they are.
Yeah.
So all the other communities had started to merge into larger bodies. And so the downside by not doing that locally, this goes to a larger question that in my latter years during my time as regional chair, is I felt we should be merging all three hospitals into one body, because that's what happened elsewhere. And so they were large bodies who, when they went to Queen's Park, they went as a large system.
Right.
They had more clout. The St. Joseph Healthcare System out of Hamilton, or the Hamilton Health Sciences, or the London Health Sciences, they go as large, important bodies. When we go to Queen's Park, we go as three separate hospitals, small hospitals, relatively speaking, to Queen's Park. So you know who carries the day and carries the clout, I believe, anyways. So this has been this from my point of view, this has been a bit of a shortfall for the region of Waterloo, and I think we've lost out in the process because we've fallen behind other communities.
So I just want to go back. So Elizabeth Whitmer was the Minister of Health at the time of this unveiling.
Right.
At the time of the discussion of amalgamations of municipalities, that was under Harris as well, right? We've talked about that before.
That's right. Yes.
And who was the Minister of Municipalities at the time?
Al Leach was the Minister
Okay.
of Municipal Affairs.
But if the general view is that we were slated to be amalgamated, and then at the press conference, it was determined that we weren't going to be amalgamated.
That's pretty accurate.
And there was suggestion that a local MPP was influential in that decision as well.
Well, I won't go down that road.
Oh, it's okay. It's been mentioned. It's been mentioned on other podcasts, so it's no problem.
So, but yes, we were on the top of the list for some form of restructuring, whether it was total amalgamation or something. We were on the top of the list, and the day of the announcement, we were off the list. So quite by surprise.
So is the current proposal talking about I just wondered, are they talking about amalgamation now, or what are they talking about now?
Well, what they're proposing now is a study to build a new acute care hospital in the North End, which will be run by two hospital boards, St. Mary's Board and the Grand River Board.
Okay. We won't get into the discussion.
That's a topic for another day.
Yeah. I just curious what was it. We won't talk about the efficacy or what have you of any of that, but interesting. So again, another situation where we were close to some sort of amalgamation. And we always say, if there's going to be amalgamation, it's got to come from the top down, because we just can't seem to get it from the bottom up. And again, we fell short.
I won't disagree with you there.
Yeah,
and I think it's even more critical. If you will talk quietly to people in the healthcare system from the hospital point of view, who believe that all three hospitals, our acute care system, whether it's in Cambridge or the North End, would have access to better services and a better use of finances if it was run by one hospital board.
Yeah.
And being able to take the money, also being able to lobby Queen's Park much more effectively, but also have more effective use of the services and facilities.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I mean, I think for the general population, we really wouldn't care where it's located. Some politicians might want to get into that sort of debate, but I think that for the general population, I mean, if you've got to go to Hamilton or Toronto or London now, you'd be happy to drive anywhere within Waterloo Region to get a higher level of care.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, interesting. Okay, well, let's get into an area then that you and I we're going to talk about originally, and it's the smoking policy, the controversial smoking bylaw. How is it that Waterloo Region came to adopt? Like, how did this start with respect to a non-smoking bylaw in Waterloo Region?
Well, I actually went back and looked at some of the chronology and some of the history over this, and it really started as early as 1993, and we started to see the news stories appearing, and that's when the medical officer of health and the associate medical officer of health of the day, Doug Sider and Ron Sachs, began to push the idea that smoking was causing huge health issues, particularly secondhand smoke, that we should be doing something to deal with them. And the cause was taken up by Mike Wagner, who was a Kitchener councillor and also a regional councillor.
Right.
He was on Health and Social Service Committee, and he kept pushing this. I mean, other people were involved in it, but he kept pushing this as well. So we went through a long series of debates and discussions about whether there should be smoking bylaws or what kind of controls there should be on it. And that sort of carried on for another 3 years over the years. And when I went back and read the notes, it was interesting to see that some councils were further ahead than other councils, as well as councillors. So by 1996, it got to the point where there was agreement that there should be some preliminary bylaws, staged bylaw. And in 1996, I believe it was, that we passed a bylaw which limited, which said that restaurants had to have at least 50% non-smoking, and other venues, bingo halls and other venues, had to have at least 25% non-smoking.
Yeah. Let me ask you for a second before we get too far down the timeline. So when you talk about the differences amongst the councils, like which councils had which opinions?
I had to go back and research, but I read one article this morning that actually Cambridge took a position that the interim work that was being proposed in about 1994, 95 wasn't strong enough, and sent it back up the region and said, we want something stronger. So it's interesting the position that different councils took.
Who was the mayor back then? Was that Claudette?
No, that would have been, I think, Jane Brewer.
Jane. Okay, Jane. All right. Yeah, interesting.
At any rate, they moved along, and so by 1996, they signaled the intention that by 2000 that we were going to go smoke free.
Actually, just one second. I just want to touch on process for a second, because so what that brings to light is that even though the region is the public health authority or the public health board or what have you, when you're looking to make a proposal like a non-smoking, no smoking bylaw, you need to get. Do you need to get buy-on from the other tiers, the other cities and townships, or is it just a courtesy thing, or what is that?
I actually can't remember the outline of the law. Some needed triple majority, and I can't remember whether this is required or not, but there was some debate at that time, as I recall, about what happens if some are in and some are out. And so that's why we took some time. We had to move to get people on board so that we had a clear majority of municipalities and people wanting to do it.
So you wanted a sort of a compromise position that everybody could buy into, and that's why you had that back and forth with
I think that was part of it. That was our way of doing things, is to try and bring people with us rather than hit them over the head with something or go after it.
The Waterloo Region way.
That's right. Works sometimes.
Hey, it's a noble goal to work towards, or approach to work towards. So who was giving you the most resistance?
That I don't recall right now, without going back and looking through them.
No, that's fine. So by 96, then that's when you pass the bylaw. That is the first phase, we'll say.
That's right. We're working towards January 1st, 2000 as the drop dead date.
And what was there must have been a lot of public consultation, though. I know you're consulting with the municipalities, but there had to be lots of public consultation too, right? Over the bylaw?
Right. There were some public meetings involved. People could come to the committee. We have very open Health and Social Services Committee. The Board of Health functions as the Health and Social Services Committee functions as the Board of Health, as does Council. So it was always open to hearing people. And we did hear regularly from people who appeared, particularly bar owners and some restaurant owners. And other people.
So they were, I guess, were they mostly concerned, or some were welcoming the opportunity to not have smoking in the restaurants anymore?
So my recollection was that the people that showed up were basically those who didn't want controls, who felt that taking away the smoking would hinder their business, that these restaurant people would lose business. And
Right.
the bars, certainly their whole business, their ability to sell booze was really contingent on people being able to smoke there at the same time.
And did any modification come out of the public consultations?
I'm trying to remember. We sort of went back and forth and listened to a lot of people, but I think at the end of the day, we pretty well stuck to our guns about our January 1st, 2000 deadline. There was some subsequent modifications regarding patios and what constituted a patio, what was allowable, those kinds of things.
Oh, okay.
By and large, the bylaw remained intact by 2000.
So 96 was the partial implementation, and by 2000, it was full implementation of the bylaw.
Right, that's correct.
And in that transition of just over 3 years, was the purpose of that to give the restaurant owners, bar owners an opportunity to adjust?
It was, I guess, to get ready for it, and we weren't going to hit them over the head tomorrow. And for those who want to make adjustments, they could.
Right. So if somebody wanted to go 100% non-smoking right away, they could have, obviously.
They could have, yes.
So what about enforcement then? That's always a nice topic, right? When you're bringing in a controversial bylaw, who's going to tell who not to smoke? Right.
Well, the enforcement became a real sort of issue because we had to beef up our enforcement staff significantly. The head of the bylaw enforcement, we hired a retired police officer who had lots of experience in dealing with this sort of thing, and some bylaw staff, and they were pretty hard nosed, but they used to come back to the office and talk about some of the things that they ran into, some of the opposition. Very, very unfriendly, doors locked, spy cameras out looking for them to come, that sort of thing. So it was a very, very unfriendly time, and the bylaw enforcement for the year or two was pretty intense and very difficult. But in the end, we sort of went out.
Well, I read like one bar, for example, had a light system and somebody looking out for any bylaw, and they'd be flashing lights to let people know to butt out.
That's right. There were a number that were particularly bad, from our point of view, bad actors.
Yeah, in terms of wanting to get around the bylaw.
Right.
I saw there was a large class action lawsuit that was filed at that time.
And we successfully defended against that.
Yeah, like the amount of damages requested was $106 million.
Right.
It's a huge number, but it's obviously a little bit disconcerting because it's your bylaw that resulted in that. And the last thing you want is it to go sideways on you.
Right.
What I guess the courts probably just said, look, this is public policy and they're entitled to do what they want. And they have a sound reason based on health and medical information to back it up.
That's right. And the courts sustained us. So we carried on.
I think the courts are loath to get involved in matters of public policy unless it's, pretty egregious or overreach by the by government.
And the other place the courts helped us was when we did lay charges, which we did quite frequently during that period. The courts applied the penalties to the owners.
Yeah, so they supported the penalties.
Right.
Yeah, I think the penalties were like for an individual. I read it's like $255 for an infraction, and I think owners had to pay. It was something like. Well, it was up to $6,700 for a double infraction was one article I had read.
Right.
So it was a costly thing, but I mean, you had to have tough penalties, right, to bring along the enforcement. I was reading about, it looked like Oktoberfest actually did well despite the smoking bylaws. Like there was an article that commented on the rise in ticket sales after the ban.
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of people who opposed, particularly restaurants and bar owners who may have opposed initially, after the fact, realized that it actually helped many of them improve their business. Maybe not some of the bars initially, but certainly on the restaurant side, people were going to restaurants who just wouldn't go any before because of the smoke.
Oh,
And didn't want to take their kids in,
yeah.
that sort of thing.
I mean,
The other one that suffered a little bit, actually a little bit at that time, where they claimed to suffer, was the bingo halls, which were the charity places.
right.
But we also, I was reading an analysis of it saying that coincidentally, with the implementation of the smoking bylaw, the casinos were just getting up and running. The lottery tickets, all those things were all eating into what traditionally had been bingo money.
Right,
So this
right.
wasn't smoking; it was other things, other avenues for people to gamble to get.
Yeah, so it'd be hard to parse out what exactly and what exact impact any particular piece of legislation or action had. But you're right. I mean, with the rise in lottery ticket sales and now, I mean, slot machines everywhere, casinos, etc. There's no doubt bingos were going to be on the decline after a little while. And I think I'm trying to remember if I ever helped out with any organization that was raising money at a bingo palace, and just the smell from the cigarettes. Oh, it was just horrific.
I heard from organizations then, and even more recently from people who are still doing volunteer bingo things, that how thankful they are for the smoking bylaw, because to send volunteers into that smoke, not only from a health perspective, but also from a clothing perspective, was deadly for them. So they were quite appreciative of it.
Yeah, I mean, the secondhand smoke, has significant health problems for everybody as well. So just to go back then, I mean, the Regional Waterloo, so your medical officer is looking at this. There's really no guidance from the province, right? This is like an independent action by the Regional Waterloo.
Right. We took the initiative because weren't getting a lot of action on that front from the province of Ontario. It really was only when we did it, and then a few others followed suit with us, that the province saw was possibly safe to do it. So the province acted after us.
So you were the canary in the mine shaft.
Well, to some degree we were, yeah.
You survived politically, so then the province said, okay, we can do this.
Right. Well, I think I may have mentioned to you that my daughter, who was just involved with rugby at that time, she was an occupational therapist in town, but she was very active in rugby. And so in rugby, social life is important. So they always go out to the pub afterwards with the opposing team to have a beer. And she walked into the washroom, and in the washroom on the wall was a picture, my picture, with the bullseye superimposed over top of it.
Like, yeah, I mean, that's that. A lot of people don't realize how many scars you take on your back when you're doing that. And I keep relaying to everybody your comment to me about the circle of friends getting smaller when you become a mayor, and the difficulties you have when you make these decisions, because it's such a public business, and people will all have opinions and a suggestion on how to better run it or better decide things. And I can't think of any other industry or anything else you do where there's such openness and open to commentary.
Right.
I wonder what social media would have been like back then, Ken.
Probably pretty rough.
Yeah.
And I think social media on a lot of issues makes life a lot tougher and much more and much uglier in the process. So
I agree with you. I think like I always say to people is I used to say to Doug down in Cambridge, and on one of the podcasts he acknowledged, with the arena location. Remember they were talking about a fourplex with Conestoga College. And he said it was social media that killed it, because it flipped a number of the counselors who he had on board. And then when it came time to do the vote, had flipped because of the pressure on social media. Mm-hmm. And I think social media is something that grinds a lot of people. Not only is it, I just did a podcast with Melissa Durrell, and after 2 terms, she mentioned about being exhausted by all the work and everything you do to try to keep things moving along. And I agreed with that, because I remember after just my 4 years how exhausted I was from working and doing and being mayor and regional councillor. Was quite a lot all at once. And social media would just, I think, make you even more vulnerable when you're in that exhausted state, because the criticism seems to strike a little bit deeper and harsher when you're reading that stuff. So
I think one of the things that towards the end of my time there, I didn't read a lot of it, and I purposely didn't read a lot of it, because no matter what you can say, it's tough and it's not fair. but it bothers you at the same time, and you wonder who you're balancing out there. So I think the social media is for those politicians, and that's most of them these days, who are tuned into all their social media. It makes life pretty rough for them.
Yeah, I'm almost of the mind, just do what you think you have to do, consult with people. Don't read any of the social media and just keep doing what you're doing.
That's right. That's why I always tell when I used to go to you want to be a politician seminars, and I said, establish your principles, know what you want, and stick with them. And if you do that, you'll be in good shape. But if you let all the other things around you start to push you off course, then you're in trouble. And that's what social media does to too many.
Yeah. And this smoking bylaw is a great example, right? I mean, it easily could have been pounded due to social media over this, but you stuck to the principles and you had valid medical reasons for pushing forward with it. It was sound science and sound policy. And
that one, there were some good voices in support of it, but by and large, the large number of voices are obviously those who were opposed to it. So they were much more vocal and much more out in force. So you have to find what's right and stick with it.
Did the smoking bylaw ever come up during any of the election campaigns you had to face?
I don't recall it ever did, no.
Yeah, so it was something that would have been passed and people started to accept it, and not like with ION, for example, how that came up in multiple elections.
It came up in multiple elections, but it never impacted the outcomes. That was the interesting thing I found. I mean, it was 3 elections. The ION was on the agenda for 3 election campaigns, and other than the last one where there was an opponent running who didn't win,
right,
it never really rose to the top, or nobody was ever defeated over ION, and any of the candidates who supported ION throughout that time.
Right. Would have been interesting. It just made me think now. Back in was it 2010 when they had the fluoride, the fluoride referendum in Waterloo.
Yep.
And at the same time, Waterloo and Kitchener also had the amalgamation question.
Right.
Do you want to have a conversation about amalgamation? So that would get people's interest, I guess, in that way. And so can you imagine, had you ever had a thought of putting the smoking policy on a referendum?
No, never did.
I mean, there's always that argument. I mean, some people might say, do it that way, let people decide. But then the other argument is, look, we were elected to make decisions, right?
Right. Well, Canadian, by and large, Canadian governance is not like American governance in that case, where the American system is very keen on referendums or votes and things like that. In Canada, we're more used to a representative democracy where you elect people and you let them make their decisions, and then you either throw them out or put them back in at the end of the day. And not to say that there's never a referendum in Canada, but by and large, that's not our style of government here.
Right. We elect people who we think have good heads to make decisions.
That's right.
All right. That's curious. Interesting. So another thing, so after Waterloo passed its smoking bylaw, you said some other municipalities followed suit?
And I can't remember all of them, but there was a fair number that sort of followed us. They came to see us, ask what we had done, how we'd done things, and based on their model on what we had done. If you Google this right now, you'll find a discussion, for example, in the district of Muskoka, where they were pursuing that idea. And there were a number of others that came and did the same thing afterwards.
So Waterloo Region kind of led with some other municipalities following, and then that's, as you said, the province finally decided, they could push ahead with it.
That's right.
So this would have been all around the time of the hospital discussion. You had the Minister of Health was right in your backyard.
She was.
Do you remember having any conversations with her about the smoking bylaw?
We did from time to time, and I think that at that time, from her point of view, the government left it as a local matter. So
okay. You never know what the politics does on some of these things, right?
That's right.
Okay, so the other thing that we kind of pushed ahead on, I believe, was a pesticide policy as well.
I said I have to honestly admit I don't remember a lot of the detail of the pesticide debate. I know that we had quite a lengthy debate over a period of time and decided to take the lead because we had a lot of support from the environmental groups in the region to start banning pesticides. And so again, once again, the province was sort of slow off the mark on this, and So we took the lead and did some preliminary work on banning pesticides. I think the place where it's readily the most obvious is the dandelion crops in the spring on boulevards.
Right.
But we went ahead and did it, and very shortly after that, the province followed along and did it province-wide.
So, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I didn't think much of the public health board or the public health authority or what have you as part of the regional role and responsibility, but it is pretty extensive, right? I mean, when you start talking about food inspections and restaurants and that sort of thing, is it always been the purview of the responsibility of the municipality?
So when the regions were created back in the late 60s, early 70s, there were independent health, what's called health units, boards of health, and they were independent. And so when regions were created, the question was, what happens to these boards of health? So there was a push from the regions to say, many of them are contiguous with our area of government. Why not have a synergistic model where the boards of health are actually part of the region? And so at that time, the province made the regional councils the boards of health and get it away with autonomous boards of health. There still is autonomous board of health. For example, Wellington and Dufferin and Grayer, or Wellington, Dufferin and Guelph are one board of health. Perth next door, Huron are another board of health. They're independent. And there's always been a bit of a tension in that because the medical officers of health do have some political independence, but they still report within the regional council framework. There are certain things that the regional council can't order medical officers of health to do, but it allowed for a synergy so that they would interact with social services on water issues. They could interact with the engineering department, on housing, all those sorts of things. So for example, when smoking bylaw, council was able to, because they had smoking, ban smoking in assisted housing or assisted housing units. So that model,
right.
So that model is out there.
Yeah.
More recently, the bureaucrats in Toronto have really want to take control of the health units again. And so prior to COVID coming along, and I fought this for a decade with various ministers of health, that leave synergistic integrated health units together because they work much more efficiently and they get better support rather than having these autonomous bodies sitting out there who nobody knows what's going on most of the time and have no public accountability.
And who would appoint the people overseeing these?
Well, the province or the municipalities appoint some reps to them, but they operate independently. So as you, from your experience, that anybody could come to a meeting of the regional council or the Health and Social Service Committee and speak to a public health issue. That doesn't happen quite so easily in these independent units. So there's a move afoot now, has been for a number of years, which I fought during my time in office, to have the province take over the health units and pull them out of the regions and set them up as independent bodies or run out of Toronto. So,
is that because of things like Walkerton or what? Like, I don't understand. Like, I could see, it just seems to me the model we currently have makes sense, but sometimes there's some event that disturbs the process and suddenly everybody has a knee-jerk reaction to change how it's done. Was there something that caused that?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. One is there's a group of people within the provincial health bureaucracy who felt they wanted control of all the public health units. So there's the issue of who controls them. That's the one thing. Secondly, there are times when you get a medical officer of health who's does things that the province doesn't necessarily agree with, not necessarily within the regional systems, but the independent public health unit. So you may recall there was when COVID first struck, there was a medical officer of health down in the southern part of the province towards Lake Erie who was taking positions that were opposed to where the province was at. And so they weren't controlling what all of the MOHs were saying. So I think that that need to sort of gather everybody up and do the same thing is sort of carrying some weight in Queen's Park. I think it's the wrong way to go, but
yeah. So I could see that. So it's politics, basically. The messaging, the political messaging was varied, and Queen's Park couldn't control the entire message across the province because the public health authorities would decide generally everybody would be in line, but if there's some that are not in line, then that somehow makes that, I don't know, a nuisance or what have you.
Yeah. During my time as regional chair, there were least two ministers of health with whom I made established contacts and had some credibility, and we were able to get them to back the bureaucracy off. After I left, I think some of that bureaucracy has changed and the players have changed, and so I'm not sure where this will end up, but I think there's still a move afoot to capture them back.
It's sort of like the LINs, the way they keep changing, the models for the LINs keep changing all the time.
Well, there is no LIN anymore.
I know, it's whatever it's called.
Ontario Health. And so
I'm still trying to remember OMB and whatever. Then there was LPAT, and then there's
right.
Now it's Ontario Land Tribunal.
Yeah.
You just can't
anyway,
keep.
Public health has played an important role in our region and a leadership role, and it's done through regional council. And I think, quite frankly, my betting is that if we had an independent board of health back in the 1990s, we wouldn't have had a smoking bylaw, because you needed political willpower and political strength behind it to do it.
Right.
And it's easier to not support something or not get involved with it. It's somebody else's baby and let them do it. Where this one, you had a commitment from regional council to follow through. And
right.
Being the board of health gave it that ability to follow through.
Yeah, I can see that. I see that. So there's a lot to be said about being able to adapt regionally with these models that are spread out, rather than have one central Toronto focused approach.
Right.
At Queen's Park.
You can have local initiatives, which wouldn't happen under that system.
Yeah. Well, I'm not gonna apply that to the amalgamation discussion in Kitchener-Waterloo, because my views keep changing with respect to that issue here. So, in the recent camp situation has kind of altered my view a touch with respect to, who controls the land and the parks and that sort of thing versus what the region's able to do. And so it really takes the workings of both to make something happen. And I'm not sure how easily that's accommodated in the current framework. So
not easily.
Yeah, well, you know what, and it's a public health situation too, right? When you have these encampments set up the way they are,
right?
And what does what has the region done? The region's gone to court. It's almost like an abdication of your public health role and asking the court basically to evict when you have that authority already. So it's still not clear to me. But I could see if you had a more public health focus on things like they did on the smoking policy, that you could probably find your way through to a solution.
Well, the other thing is that the framework where all the departments are working together, or should be working together, put it that way, should be working together. You probably have better opportunity to do integrated approaches to doing these things than having the authority scattered all over the place between lower tier and upper tier, different departments. And so that's a topic for another day. But
yeah. For sure. And I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna leave today at that on that note, that we've shown a very successful situation where the region was able to work independently of itself from the rest of the province. But at the same time, there are things within the region, the way it's structured, that maybe could be better done, more ideally done. Like hospital mergers was really a situation where you had a decentralized approach and couldn't get the parties together to come up with an amalgamated approach, which would have been better off for us overall.
That's right.
So yeah, interesting pros and cons. So yeah, anytime you're ready to have a chat on amalgamation in the region, I'm always up to have that conversation with you, Ken. So listen, Ken.
I don't know when my code of silence officially ends.
I know you still well at some point, there's got to be a statute of limitations on this. If they're just using that report for paperweight, there's going to be at some point where you can feel free to express yourself. So
well, I think that I'm watching stuff going on around the province that really could be dealt with quite simply, but would be dealt with by some of the recommendations in our report. And it's too bad the government isn't choosing to act on them.
Yeah. Oh, well, listen, Ken, thanks a lot for the time today. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us, and we'll have you back another time soon. All right. You take care. After we concluded the podcast, I thought I would ask Ken to come back on and provide us with some of his thoughts about delegations to council.
people that come to council to present their thoughts, ideas, comments about a particular issue, usually on the agenda of the day. I asked him for his observations and to provide us with some of his ideas on best practices when delegating to a council.
Okay, so Ken, we were chatting briefly about the pesticide ban that Waterloo Region instituted. And in my brief research, I noted that there were actually a lot of communities at the time, municipalities in Ontario and across Canada, that were instituting their own individual pesticide bans. Do you recall that?
Yes, in the case of the pesticides, we were part of a larger group that was doing it. The province wasn't doing anything and or couldn't get them to act on it. So individually, municipalities were doing that.
So it's kind of interesting to me how, as a public health authority, public health board, the municipalities have this power to institute rules or regulations when there is a health component to it, and where the province or the feds won't step in. So you do have a lot of power.
Well, it is circumscribed somewhat. I'm not a constitutional person,
Right,
but
right.
I think as I recall the discussion, you take for things that aren't expressly prohibited by legislation. Legislation, in some cases, gives a jurisdiction to the province to do something, and in that case, municipalities can't do it. But if it's unspoken, then I think there's some room to move. And I think some of the challenges were to the various municipal things that whether or not they had the authority to do that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, it happened twice. Once on smoking, where the municipality stepped in, and on this pesticide ban, where the municipality stepped in. So I agree with you. If you'd have to, that's why you have your legal department, right? Every municipality can refer to lawyers to determine whether what they want to propose under a bylaw is within their jurisdiction. Correct?
Right, and I think these are both examples of cases where the province was just not quite sure that it had the political will or the backing to go ahead and do something, so it was quite prepared to let municipalities take the lead. And when they saw that the backlash wasn't so severe, then they moved themselves.
Yeah, so it's sort of like how politics kind of rears its ugly head from time to time in the face of health issues.
That's right.
Which is too bad. But on smoking, Waterloo Region was the leader in instituting a ban.
Right.
But on pesticides, there were already a number of areas that had already instituted a pesticide ban by the time Waterloo Region got on board.
Yeah, I think we were one of the larger ones to move on it, but my recollection is not all that clear. So
yeah, but I guess the other thing that it kind of raises, and just a question on that is, if you have each individual municipality doing their own thing, you could end up with different rules in your neighboring municipalities than the ones you have in your own.
well, that was certainly an issue with the smoking bylaw, particularly for those who followed on afterwards. People would say, well, this municipality did it this way. Why don't you do it this way? Or why don't you change doing what they're doing? Because they like their scenario better.
Yeah.
So that's always a problem, particularly when you got adjoining municipalities and they're doing things differently.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old movies where somebody would be speeding, and once they got across the county line, the sheriff couldn't go after them anymore. All these different rules and regulations. So on pesticides and smoking, obviously you would have had delegations that would have come forward, as we've talked about, and you see. So just on smoking, do you recall what the delegations generally were like when they were appearing before council? Was it predominantly a hostile crowd? Was it a 50-50 for and against sort of thing?
I don't recall the split at this time, but there was obviously people representing both sides. Obviously, the bar owners and some of the restaurateurs and people like that, or people who sold cigarettes, certainly had an interest, and they appeared, and some of them were stronger than others. On the other side, we had a number of people who were interested in public health, and I can recall one or two local doctors who were extremely vociferous in their opposition to smoking appearing. And so we had both the full range of the whole full spectrum. But I think by and large, I would say a significant number, a majority probably favored the ban, but probably the strongest speaking people, with one exception on the health side, were the pro smokers.
Okay, yeah, trying to keep it.
Right.
So when you think about your years as chair and just being involved in politics generally, I'm just curious if there were any delegations that kind of stick out in your mind as particularly memorable.
Well, yeah, there was certainly during the ion discussion, there were some pretty hot and heated delegations. I remember I was out for part of that discussion because there was a question of whether there was a conflict or not. So I had
Right.
to withdraw briefly, but I listened to some, and even while I was still involved, we had delegations all along the way. And there were some pretty strong delegations. I remember one session we had actually had 2 nights. There were so many delegations. I think there's something like 48 or 50 delegations
Right. There were a lot.
split between 2 nights. And so it was quite clear that the environmental groups, the farming community, the Federation of Agriculture, all those people who were supportive of restricting growth and supporting the iron for those reasons came out and spoke very strongly and very eloquently about it. Then there were those who, on the other side, were probably represented 2 or 3 views. One was, don't raise our taxes. This is going to spend, this
Right.
is costly. What business have you doing building an ion in a community of this size? There were those who had businesses along the route and didn't want their their left turn accesses restricted into their.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah.
Um, uh, and there was just some general, very not some, I would say, from my point of view, not very nice delegations who were just generally opposed to the project for any reason. And actually, 1 or 2 surprising ones. People who I thought would have been supportive weren't supportive. Yeah, so there was a full range and lots of delegations.
Yeah, I remember. Obviously, I had a conflict, but I listened closely to what the delegations had to say, and I always remember the group from the church that was down by Caroline and Herb Street, and the concern they had about the impact on, I think it was their choir or the music that they would be playing as the train would come by or make that bend
Yeah.
down there. So would you say then that the ION delegations were the sort of the most memorable for you in terms of over your years at the regional council?
I would say the ion and the smoking were the 2 probably most memorable ones for me in terms of variety of opinion, extremity of opinions, quantity of opinions. Those were probably the 2 most outstanding ones.
Well, I always remember the ones that really stuck out for me were the ones that always seemed to have a lot of good informative information, like the TriTag group. And I've mentioned this several times on various podcasts that group always impressed me with the level of information and their analysis, assessment, and recommendations to transit all the time on ways to improve transit and access to services. It was always quite impressive to me.
Well, in some ways, when you look at it today, you think of the debate over COVID and some of the restrictions on COVID. You think back to that debate and you think the debate for COVID was science versus myth or what you think. And
Right.
back then, the TriTag group always brought well-researched, well-documented
Yeah.
arguments to the table for us. Or where people would say, well, you can't do it because it's going to raise my taxes. That's the only reason you shouldn't do it. Or it won't do the things you're going to do. What's your proof that it's going to do it? So, there's some parallels between the COVID debates and the iron debates.
Well, yeah. And what also impressed me was these were people that are just like basically volunteers, right? I mean, they had some other job, but the level of information they were providing was almost as if they were full-time planners, and that was their job, and they were presenting this information. It just was always impressive.
Well, it was sort of interesting because that was the first time I think I recall on a large scale. Certainly in the smoking side, we had public health people, public health proponents, but it was the first time I'd seen a group of people, and particularly in a certain age group, had mobilized, not only mobilized, but well researched and well documented, and did an awful lot of work to back up their case.
Yeah, they seem like people in their like sort of their late 20s, early 30s that were providing this level of impressive information. So let me ask you, Ken. Then obviously, when delegations come, and I always remember, there's always this: you ask some questions after, or don't ask them questions after as a counselor. Can really make the night long or what have you. But just first off, about delegations themselves, some do's and don'ts, or your impressions of what makes a good delegation. We'll say, what suggestions do you have?
Well, I think the first thing that stands out to me is a delegation needs to be respectful of the question, but also respectful of the counselors. if somebody stands up there and lambaste the counselors and telling them they're stupid and they don't know what they're doing to start off with,
Right.
automatically that most counselors are going to shut down right away.
Yeah.
Have well-reasoned material, talk as if the people you're talking to are knowledgeable and understand things, and make sure that your questions reflect good research. I think the worst things a delegation can do is talk down to counselors.
Right.
The minute you start talking down to them, it creates a reaction automatically. And then sometimes when you're talking down, they may have good points that they're making, but people stop listening because they think that they're being arrogant, and that arrogance may reflect something else. So
because you're basically, as a delegation, you're talking to the decision makers. And so I go through this as a personal injury lawyer, and you're dealing with a jury trial. And so I've got to talk to 6 people
right.
About the case. And it's so important that you are, treating them respectfully, and not talking down to them, using, watching the language that you're using when you're speaking to them. But, trying to present the evidence or the information to convince them to your side of the argument or the debate. So one of the things too would be you only have generally like 5 minutes or so, when you're a delegation, right?
Yep, that's right. It was 10. I'm not sure if they've changed it.
10, but you're limited in your time. I mean, it might seem like a lot, but once you get up there, and I always found people that just read from their script, like sometimes they would hand you their script and then they got up there and they just read exactly what they just handed you. And I don't think that was the most most beneficial use of your time up there.
No, I think not. I think you need to highlight what's in there and point out the things that you want them to take a look at. Make sure you hit the highlights so they know what the highlights are. But if you stand there and read the script, you're just wasting I shouldn't say you're wasting your time, but you're less effective use of your time.
Yeah. And you would strongly urge people to, if they wanted to make a passionate appeal or an appeal to their particular position. It's one thing. Often we get, now in this day and age, you get inundated with emails, or if you have a Twitter account or some other social or Facebook account, you get inundated with things through social media. How do you compare that with people actually showing up at a council meeting to make their case?
Well, that's interesting. I haven't been there during the COVID period, so that's changed a lot of the dynamics that are going on right now. That people can appear by Twitter
or virtually, yeah.
Virtually. But once again, the same rules apply on Twitter. That I think one of the problems with Twitter meetings is that people are less careful of what they say because they're not in front of the people. You're not actually face to face. If you don't know if you don't see the body language, you don't have to deal straight face to face with the people you're talking to. People are less careful in what they say. And I think that if you're continuing on with Twitter accounts or similar meeting accounts, people need to be cognizant of that. I think.
Yeah. So I guess there's some general principles that would apply when you're a delegate, whether it's on a Zoom call or in person. But overall, if we can get back to in person, you'd consider that more effective than the Zoom approach that's been going on over the past few years?
I would say so. I think dealing with people in person is always more meaningful. I found that. But you can relate to the person to whoever's there as a person, and whether you agreed or disagreed with them, you get a better sense of them, you get a better feel for them. So I think that although Zoom's handy, I would say that better kind of delegation is in person, where people can actually relate to a person.
I remember one particular delegation we had, and I forget which school, whether it was the Woodland Christian, or I think it was Woodland Christian, that was doing some expansion on their property and were coming to see if they could get a rebate on their development charges, or I don't know, property taxes or something. And I don't know if you remember that they filled the gallery was just filled with family and siblings up there. What and then the principal presented. What's your view in terms of supporters filling the chamber?
I didn't particularly like it when people sort of loaded the chamber, trying to sway the debate. I recognize their right to do that, and in some cases, I think if there's something that's really important to people, that they have the ability to come out and do that sort of thing.
Right.
But by and large, I think sometimes if you fill the council, I remember debates with taxi drivers where they fill the we were doing change of the taxi bylaw, and they would fill the chamber with taxi drivers who were opposed to what we were doing. And I don't think that really helped the case for them at all. And quite
Right.
frankly, I think
Might feel like somebody, in other cases, it might feel like they're intimidating. I remember on that particular one with the Woodland Christian, I actually used that as an opportunity to address the crowd to talk about the difficulties of the position and our position in terms of granting that request versus all the other requests we get all the time. Because ultimately, if you're quote waiving fees or what have you, you got to make that up from the tax base somewhere else, right?
And you're not displaying favoritism to any one group either, and you got to impress that upon people whether they accept it or not. That's part of it.
What about from the counselor's perspective? One of the things is the whole concept of whether to ask questions or not of the delegation.
Well, sometimes it's interesting. That's a bit of politics involved in this, because if you had a delegation that was asking for something that really was out of the normal or wasn't policy or something like that, but you had a counselor who was sympathetic to it, the counselor would ask their questioning as a way of giving them more than the 10 minutes. So,
right.
So you see that happening from time to time. I think particularly when there are long numbers of delegations, I think councils learn very quickly. The more questions asked, the longer it is, and fewer people get hurt at the end of the day. So I think very early on, if there's large numbers of delegations, councils learn very quickly. Only ask key questions and only ask something for new information, because otherwise it just opens up the door for an extended period of time.
Well, it can make for a very long night. Now you're into 11 o'clock, and you've got to bring a motion to extend, and you're into midnight, and I mean it's hard to keep your focus over that long period of time.
Right. So I mean there are ways of playing the delegation game, both by councillors and by the audience. So you just have to be aware of them and make sure you deal with it.
But overall, an integral part of what we do is hearing from the community.
Well, that's it's sort of interesting, because people talk about this whole idea of extending the Greenbelt to cover Waterloo Region, and it may be unrelated, but it's related in a sense. Is that we always said we opposed that because our regional growth management strategy was stronger than the Greenbelt legislation.
Right.
The other side of that whole coin is that the province then controls the process. So how often did you get to speak to the legislative committee in Queen's Park when they're going to do something? So they could unilaterally make changes within the Greenbelt policy.
Right.
May or may not be one of the 100 delegations that gets heard province-wide down there. And if you've ever been down to a delegation of the province, it's pretty cut and dried. And so our ability for the public to control things is much stronger by doing things here. My point being, delegations can appear and all speak and be heard at the regional council level or at the city level, where that wouldn't happen at Queen's Park.
Yeah,
so that
right.
Talks to the strength of the local system and having delegations and being able to be a delegation.
Well, it speaks to that. It's the theme of the podcast. All politics is local, and when you're able to do things at the municipal level, I think people have a better opportunity to participate in the political process when things are kept at the municipal level.
And there's also a level of accountability, because they come and they hear the question, they hear the debate, and then at the end of the debate, they know who voted for what and why.
And they can track you down at the grocery store.
Right? Because if you have an issue with the province, the federal government, you can go and complain to your MP or your MPP.
Yeah.
And that MP or MPP will listen to you and maybe sympathize with you, but that MPP has no control over the government's agenda. That comes out of the Premier's office and the legislative majority. And so at least at the local level, you have an opportunity to see the game in action, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, every 2 weeks or whatever the frequency of council meetings are, you have an opportunity to be a delegate. But on provincial matters, you don't have that same benefit unless you're going down to Toronto or they're going around the province to take as a commission or what have you. It's very it's farther away from you. You're less participatory, it seems.
That's right. Even at things that affected the region, if they put a bill up for hearing,
we would call and say we want to speak, and sometimes they'd say, "Oh no, we've already got our speakers. You can't speak. No space for you." So that meant we're locked out of the discussion and debate.
Yeah. Well, I told a story about my old friend Dave Reif, and Dave, he loved local politics, and he'd always show up once in a while at the council meetings. And whether he was a registered delegate or not, I'd always ask Dave if there's anything he wanted to add to the meeting. So, all right. Well, listen, Ken, thanks for that information. And was there anything else you wanted to add that?
I think we've covered all the bases.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. All right. Awesome. Thank you for listening to another edition of the Old Grey Mayors podcast. If you have any ideas for stories or people you would like us to interview or reach out to, please feel free to contact us. And thank you again.